This week we meet Greg Anderson, the MD of RM Sotheby's, the global supercar auction business. Greg shares his career journey from a dabble in politics to an earlier career in event management, which then led to him joining and falling in love with RM Sotheby's and selling some of the world's best cars. He explained how the business has evolved along with his leadership style and how new opportunities presented themselves with the acquisition of the business by the auctioneers Sotheby's. Finally, he shares some great advice to his younger self about always being inquisitive. I hope you enjoy. Welcome, Greg. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, delighted to join you.
As we've discussed, we have a tradition now where we kick off the podcast just so everybody knows who Greg Anderson is and what he does. It would be great if you could give me the sort of story of how you've ended up as MD at RM Sotheby's, and then we can talk in great detail about the actual business. But it's just good to get that context of your career journey in there and a bit of background on the business as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in Coventry in the West Midlands and migrated down to London to go to university like lots of other people. Did a politics degree, didn't really know what I was going to do after that. Thought a career in politics might be quite interesting, but wasn't really sure. So stayed there, did another degree, did a master's degree in politics as well, with a lot of modern history involved in it. So that was great.
So you thought you'd double down to see if that really falls the future?
I was just struggling a bit, Steve, if I'm honest. I thought it sounded like it was a better use of time than taking, some sort of job that I regretted.
In London, playing rugby, having fun, so why not?
Yeah. So I did that and made some sort of feeble half attempts to try and get into a job in politics, which didn't really work. So I took a job at the Geological Society of London, which was a perfect job for someone like me at the time, brand new, straight out of university, didn't really know very much, and I was just there selling or organising events that happened within their small sort of function rooms. Really enjoyed that, and actually then thought a career in event management was the way I was going to go. So I took but I did manage to find a job that combined my interest in politics and sort of brief levels of experience in event management, and I took a job working for a public affairs consultancy for a couple of years. It was a maternity leave post, and I thought, well, I'll give it 6 months and see, maybe they like me and they keep
see
me
how
on.
It goes.
And they did, which was great. So did that for a couple of years, but realised that actually a career in politics probably wasn't for me. So but what it did open the door to was event production. A couple of the events we did had big production values on them, big stage sets, lots of technology and all that type of stuff. And I found that fascinating. So I then took another job in my sort of mid to late 20s working for a production agency in London, which was great. And I loved it. The best couple of years I'd had to that point. Lots of responsibility in budgeting and people management and delivering on projects, that kind of stuff, which was awesome. And one of the clients we had, I should say, was RM Auctions, who at that point, so this was sort of 2006, 7, 8, they were just expanding into Europe. So they had a very successful North American business and they wanted to set up a European business. They only had a few people, so they couldn't organise the auctions themselves. They needed a production agency to help them, and that's what the agency I worked for did. So I started to work at RM Auctions before I actually worked for them, if you see what I mean. I was managing their auctions and events from a logistics perspective and from a stage management perspective and things like this, because the shows that they put on were significant. They weren't just 100 cars in a marquee with an old auctioneer at the front. They very much believed in putting on a show. So for the first couple of years that I worked sort of with RM Auctions, that was my role. But I didn't probably unlike you, Steve, unfortunately, but I didn't. There was a side to the agency life which I found I struggled with a bit, and that was that I'd never felt like I could work continuously with somebody. It felt like you were parachuting in for a month or two or three or
Yeah.
whatever it was, and then you're out again. And I found that a bit frustrating because I wanted to do, I felt like I could do more if I was within these businesses rather than external to them. And so I made my mind up to try and find a job again in the event world in some capacity, but working for, I don't know, a big bank or a high street sort of retailer or
So actually
somebody
move to what we'd always call client side and sort of go on that
client
side
side.
rather than the agency. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I was looking for that sort of move, and I mentioned to the guys at RM that the last auction I did with them was probably going to be my last, and that I was looking to move on. And then a couple of weeks later, they picked up the phone and offered me a job, which was great. And so they employed me uh, as an event manager essentially, but they bolted on a few other responsibilities, photography, organizing, and transport planning, stuff I never knew anything about. But I thought, I'd always taken a few risks in my career to that point. And I'd taken a couple of jobs which were only mat leave posts, and I ended up staying for longer. And I was happy to sort of move outside my comfort zone. When you're in your late 20s, you don't think too much about these things. You're a lot more brave. I didn't have much of a mortgage. Like there wasn't much
Yeah.
responsibility around me. So I thought, well, let's try it and see how it goes. I very much liked the company and what they did, and you know, hold being part of an organization that organizes car auctions, and from every angle is fascinating because it's just so niche. It's something I'd never really come across before. I'd no experience of it growing up. Didn't even know it really existed until I started to work for them. So it was very exciting, and I started off, like I say, just organising their events and their auctions and transport planning, photography coordination, and then over time that grew. And I suppose I liked the company and they gave me more responsibility. We were only a very small team. There was only sort of 6 or 7 of us, so you had to wear lots of hats anyway. And yeah, over time that sort of changed to they gave me some marketing responsibilities and PR, photo shoots and film shoots and a lot more financial responsibility and I was setting up companies in different parts of Europe or helping to set them up at least. And it really just grew and snowballed over sort of, I suppose the first 5 years that I was there, from being something quite small to being much broader. Um, about halfway, so I suppose around about 2014 or 15, um, we had a bit of a change in the business in that Sotheby's acquired us, a small part, it's like 25%. And with that, we were given a bit more sort of encouragement to try and grow the business. So we went from holding just 2 auctions a year to three, then four, then five, then six by the time sort of 2019 came around. And at that point, I was the chief operations officer, and there was still only about 15 of us in the business. Um, COVID hit, obviously, for everybody, which is a nice thing, and in some ways because we were actually quite well prepared for an online auction in sort of service, which was great. And then following COVID, we've been rather aggressive in how we've expanded the business, and it's actually worked out rather well. And now we hold auctions not just in the UK and in Europe and in North America, but we've recently launched auctions in the Middle East, and there's plans further afoot to keep growing. So um, my particular job has grown as the business has grown. It's as simple as that, really.
Yeah.
And about 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, um, the old managing director joined a rival of ours, and so that left the position open. I'd been there for 10 years at that point. I knew the business, I understood what it needed to do on a daily basis and how to plan and sort of grow it. And I was also surrounded by some good people who'd been there for a long time as well. And they gave me the opportunity to be managing director, which was, very generous, and I've done everything I can to sort of repay that as best I can.
Brilliant. There's lots and lots and lots
Yeah,
to cover there. Let me just make one point, if I can, Greg.
yeah,
People, when they hear car auctions, may well think of buying their first banger for
yeah,
900 quid. So
yeah,
maybe we should just give a little bit more information of the sorts of cars that you are auctioning. And obviously, I think they'll guess with the link with Sotheby's, it's maybe slightly higher market than that.
yeah. So yes, I should clarify that we operate at the top end of the market. So I think the average price point for a car that we sell is around about £350,000. Um, and we hold, I think it's about six or seven. I think it's either six or seven of the most expensive cars ever sold at auction have been sold by RM Sotheby's,
Wow.
including which the big one is the 300 SLR Uhlenhaut Coupe, which we sold in 2022, and we sold that for 135 million euros, um, which was, yes, it's a staggering sum of money, and it's actually I think it's like the I think it's obviously the most expensive car ever sold, but I think it's like in the top 10 most expensive items ever sold at auctions. That's competing with art and everything else. So it's a very
Yeah.
substantial
Yeah.
sort of car that we sold. But now look, that's head and shoulders above it in terms of value above anything else that I've ever been witness to selling at a car auction. But
When
typically,
you do it, when you're
yeah,
doing your crowd, so that's the one you reel out, isn't
yeah, it's a
it?
nice
Yeah.
one to mention, and yes, it is, and it took us a little bit by surprise, which is the great thing about auction, because you sort of you don't always know what's going to happen, and if you have two or three people that want one thing very very badly, then you will find that you'll get a great price for it, and that's essentially what happened here. But yeah, the business does aim at transacting in at the sort of $1 million, multi-million-dollar level as much as possible, and that's not just because we want to make as much money as possible. It's not just a purely financial thing. It's the way the business has always been sort of developed. It's certainly in the last sort of 15, 20 years. That's always been what we've been aiming for. And yeah, so it is slightly different to your point, Steve, about buying your first car for a grand down at wherever it might be. But in
Yeah.
actual fact, a lot of the work that goes on, not all of it, but a lot of the work is very, very similar. And any auction house, whether you're selling secondhand silverware or whether you're selling, a top of the range, art and cars and whatever it might be, a lot of the work that goes into it is quite similar, and there's a lot of crossover.
Brilliant. So, tell me a little bit more. Obviously, you came into the business with those event management skills behind you.
Yeah.
It sounds like an auction is an event, as in it's a bit of theatre. So, could you give us some insight as to what if we rocked up at your next auction, what it would be, where it would be, what's the sort of
Yeah.
setup?
Yeah, we do. So essentially, the there's auction houses where they hold their auctions within their space. So Sotheby's, for example, have auctions in Geneva and Paris and London and New York and Hong Kong, places like this. But they tend to hold most of the time. They tend to hold those auctions within their premises on a sort
Yeah.
of a regular basis, a weekly basis, depending on which department is selling what. Um, the car world, because you need an enormous space to be able to sell 100 cars at once, we will rent spaces that we need in different territories at different times of the year. So we would typically look for a space that's 3 to 6,000 square meters in size, and and we will put on a show. So we will bring in all of the production equipment. We'll build a nice stage set. There's a great big sort of LED screen. The cars are well lit. They're quite often put onto stages or whatever it might be. It's a proper show from start to finish. The client services sort of level is really really good. We want to. The catering's great. It's not something that is just put your car in the car park and we'll sell it later in the day. It's substantial. It's a substantial investment, and quite often at the point of sale, RM Sotheby's have already spent £1 million or equivalent at least to get to that point on producing the event or the auction. But the auctions tend to happen around established car events. So there's
Right.
a
Okay.
what you'll find is that there is a calendar for it used to be classic cars. These days the sort of new modern supercar hypercar um, uh, sort of market is also very much embedded within what we do, and is actually probably the biggest growing area of the market that we look after and serve. So um, but it's but you will have these big established car events that happen in certain times of the year in certain places. For example, if you just keep it European focused, in February or late January there is Retromobile, in Paris, which is a huge car event, and it's a standard sort of exhibition type center in Paris, where there'll be dozens of exhibitors and thousands of delegates who will join and walk around, look at cars, and do all of this. There'll be transactions, there'll be big brands and manufacturers showing off their latest vehicles. You name it, it will be there. Whether it's somebody selling old books to do with cars, or whether it's Ferrari with a huge display of what they're doing for the next 12 or 24 months, whatever it might be. And we also have an exhibition there, along with a lot of the other auction houses. Um, but we have an auction in Paris at the same time as that, because we know the audience for what we
Right.
are doing is going to be there, and that's an international event. So people will be flying in from all around the world in order to go. And our hope is that they also come look at our auction, what we're selling, and hopefully buy something. And then the traveling circus will move around Europe and the Middle East and the UK as the calendar goes on. So in February it's Retromobile in Paris. In May typically it's the Monaco Historic Grand Prix, for example, is a big event where we have an auction. The Concours d'Elegance of Villa d'Este on the shores of Lake Como is the oldest car concours in the world, and we've had an auction there for the past sort of 10 years or so, although that stopped recently, but or we've stopped having an auction there recently. But and then in June we've typically held an auction in the UK. September, August is our big sale in North America. I said I was going to keep it European focused, but I've got to mention it because it's in a place called Monterey in California, which is
Oh yeah.
it's not respectfully, it's not the kind of place that you'd go to if you're going to go to California, go to LA or whatever. But actually, it's it's sort of just up the road from the Pebble Beach golf course, and they have a huge car concours there, which is basically a beauty pageant for cars, a car concours, right? So I'll perhaps come to that in a minute, but then from there we then go. In September, it's the UK, because there's the Goodwood Festival. Sorry, there's the Goodwood Revival event, which is very popular, and they have an auction, not from us, but from one of our competitors. And then, as we go to November, we have an auction. We have an auction in London, in conjunction with the Royal Automobile Club and the London to Brighton Veteran Car Run, which happens. And then in December, last few years, we've been out to Dubai in the Middle East. So it's that we sort of travel around and move from place to place, but associated the main driver to why we would go to a country and hold an auction is usually because there's an established car event. The audience is already there, and we're
Yeah.
providing some additional sort of entertainment, I suppose.
Well, it's quite smart, like you say. We spend, as marketeers, marketing agencies, we spend all our life trying to find the audience. So why not go where they're already
Yeah,
hanging out and would quite like to come along? So,
yeah,
in terms
indeed.
of the actual auction, is it sort
Yeah,
of people in the room with paddles, or
yeah.
is it a lot of it is online now? Are people
Well,
dialed in?
that's a good question. We're seeing more of a movement to people feeling comfortable buying online, and that was accelerated by COVID. So don't get me wrong, the room's still packed out, and it's very busy. Every time we hold an auction, there's never a seat available, and that's the same for most auction houses, to be honest with you. So there's always the appetite for people to be in the room and see, expensive, exotic cars being sold. That people like that as a form of entertainment. Um, but I'd probably say that it's about an even split. So you probably get as many people buy in the room as buy on the phone as buy online. Um, that didn't used to be the case, but during COVID, because the live events, as you all know, they disappeared for
Yeah.
12 months, maybe longer in some instances. Um, we had to develop we just before then developed an online way of selling cars. We were a bit nervous about it because that's not our bread and butter by any stretch of the imagination, but we went for it anyway because we didn't have a choice, and actually found out that people are prepared to spend an awful lot of money still on online, and are not having seen the car, um, but
Yeah.
but but still feel quite comfortable in that environment. So that's been great. And what we do find is that we have a lot of memorabilia that we sell. So it will be, if somebody's got a collection of I don't know, Ayrton Senna memorabilia, for example, that stuff does very well online, and people like buying that type of thing there. But Some of the cars, it's a bit 50-50 as to whether everybody feels that comfortable in that environment anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You've got to adjust and adapt as to what the market will accept as the norm. But yeah,
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
Because you like you're saying about the Ayrton Senna stuff, you don't just sell cars. You've got other services and lines in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we sell we actually have a few different models for selling things in general. So we have obviously we're an auction business. That's what we're famous for, as it were. Um, we also sell cars privately. So if somebody doesn't want the exposure of a public auction, then we will sell the car like any dealer would that you would, your local BMW dealer, for example. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing in many ways. Um, and we also have another platform called Sotheby's Sealed, which is a bit of a more it's a bit of both. So it's a very, very discreet auction, essentially, where nothing gets disclosed. You don't find out how much somebody's paid for it or anything like that, and it's run online, very similar to eBay. So we have that sort of model too. But yeah, the memorabilia items are incredibly popular, and we've sold all kinds of things over the years. So there's and when I mean memorabilia, I mean the sort of car focused in general. So it will be a helmet that was worn by somebody famous. It will be a cap, or a jacket, or it will be a piece of car art, or whatever it might be. It might even be part of an engine, that's been turned into a table or something like this. So we sell all kinds of other items as well. It's not just the cars, but we tend to find that I mean, it's great. We really enjoy doing those, but it's quite a different business model because it's very volume based, and that
Right.
doesn't always play to our strengths. So we do have to be careful with what we select, because if we to take everything in that, from that perspective, we don't have the manpower in order to actually process it.
You'd literally have an auction a day, wouldn't you? Yeah.
It kind of changes quite substantially. But having said that, it's a gateway for people to see what we do and to experience buying at auction in a much more of a less financially pressured environment. So if you're like, well, I've never really bought at auction before, but I want to see what this is about, go for it. Because the price point will be hundreds of pounds. It won't necessarily be
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
thousands of pounds, and that's a lot softer way to sort of experience what buying at auction is really all about.
Brilliant. So you also run a couple of other things. I was looking at the website. Which is it SOMO? Is that how you say it? In terms of how does that differ from the RM Sotheby's bit?
So Sotheby's Motorsport, or SOMO as it's called, is actually only US focused at the moment, but essentially it's an online
Right.
car auction platform. So that's all it is. So there really isn't much. I always say this because it's just easy for people to understand, but it's essentially like auto. It's not auto trade. It's like eBay, right? So
Yeah.
it really is as simple as that. And okay, the cars are expensive, but they're typically not they're typically sourced from people who don't want a live experience, don't want a live auction experience. They want to be able to,
Yeah.
put in the parameters that you would expect if you were on eBay to be able to sell your item. So it's still in its early stages for us, um, but without doubt, there are some huge disruptors in the online auction space in the car world. Bring a Trailer is a massive brand in North America, and they do huge business. Like, they sell hundreds of cars a week, and they have a very simple model where there is a flat fee that regardless of the car's value, you can post it, and if you sell it, you sell it. That's great. If you don't, you don't. You've got it back. Like, there's zero problem, and that is a proven, runaway success. And there have been some other people who've tried to copy that without the success of Bring a Trailer at the moment, but certainly, suppose it's our attempt to try and get into that market in a meaningful way.
Okay. And would that cover the same value of cars that you do? Does it go right to the top end, or is that more at that sort of entry
Not,
point for your world, which I know is still pretty high?
yeah. Um, I think it depends. Like, it depends on the client and what they want. Because as an auction house, you don't buy generally, typically, there isn't an ownership of anything that we're selling. We're just the broker,
Yeah.
peer person in the middle.
Yeah.
We're bringing the buyer and the seller together. Um, so it very much depends on the seller as to what they want. And some of them, some sellers, they they love a live auction experience. They like the excitement and the drama, and there's a bit of jeopardy. They like all of that, and others don't. They want to remain discreet. They want minimal hassle. They don't want to have to move the car out of their garage. They just want to take some photos of it, post it online, see if somebody wants to buy it. So it's driven by the client, and we just need to make sure as a business that we can provide as many of those different avenues for our clients, because it's a very competitive space. Selling cars, it's. I'm always amazed at how many times I sit down at lunch with somebody, and they ask me what I do, and then they start talking to me about a car that their dad owns, their uncle owns, their mum owns, whoever it might be. It's massive, and I think I never fully understood that when I first started at RM. That the passion for owning cars, using them, buying and selling them, displaying them at events, and all of these things. It's sort of sewn into the fabric of many of the sort of societies around the world. Certainly in North America, it's the relationship between people and their cars is really sort of different to what it is in the UK and in Europe. But there is an equal sort of level of passion about what they have, what they own, etc. And so, because of that, people are quite picky about how they buy and they sell, and what they buy and what they
Hmm.
sell. And so, really, as a business, we can't ignore the fact that buying anything online these days is, it's here, and it's been here forever, and it will happen, not forever, but for the past whatever it is, 10 years, and you can't ignore that. And I think it's the same with Sotheby's, the sort of bigger, the bigger company that now owns us. They too have had to switch to online platforms to sell different products, whether it be art, whether it be film posters, or trainers, or whatever other products that they sell. Watches and jewelry and all of this type of stuff. They don't just rely on a live auction experience. They have an established online platform, and that's a reaction to disruptors in sort of, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. I don't always like the word disruptors. I think that does people an injustice. But like, new companies that have come along and sort of said, well, actually, we can do everything that you're doing, but we can post it online, make it cheaper, and make it more efficient, get more eyeballs on it. We have to react to that kind of thing. So yeah, that's why we've gone down that road, and I think it's difficult to cover all the bases. If I'm honest with you, it's not an easy sort of position to be in, to be sort of market leading in live auction space and in private sales, and
Yeah.
online as well. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of resource, and you quite often find you have a lot of competing things happening at once, and stealing from each other's sort of thunder. If you've got a great online auction happening at the same time as you've got a great live auction happening, that can be a problem. And so planning all of these things becomes quite tricky. But it's a challenge, and it's one that I think the business is doing quite well at the minute. Definite room for improvement, but all things considered, I think we're quite well positioned across all of those different areas.
Yeah, and has the partnership with Sotheby's, obviously, I know they've acquired you in the end, but has having that, I think you described him as your big brother, has
Yeah.
that helped the business? Does that give you a different angle? Is it a way to get into different markets?
The Sotheby's relationship is huge for us, and although it's interesting because it's not so, for example, so RM stands for Rob Myers, right? I'll go back to the beginning a bit on this one, if that's all right. And he's the person that
Yeah, of course.
created RM auctions, and it was back in the late '70s. He had a garage essentially, which restored cars, and he did this work with well, but as I say, essentially, he started in his own garage at home and started to restore cars, and the clients that he was restoring them for would quite often take them to auction. So after a while, he thought, well, I can probably restore some cars and take them to auction too. So he started that sort of process going. And then after a little period of time, he thought, well, actually, I think I can do this auction thing too, right? So he set up his first auction in Canada in I think 1990 or 1991 in Toronto, proved to be really successful, and then set up a sort of North American footprint of auctions in California, Florida, Michigan, and then Arizona. And so by the early 2000s, he had this really successful auction business called RM Auctions, which was, very quickly positioned itself as the best car auction house or classic car auction house in America. And when the time came for him to expand into Europe as RM Auctions, he did that in conjunction as an associated business of Sotheby's. So Sotheby's essentially
Okay.
gave RM Auctions their blessing. I want to call it's probably not the right phrase, but they sort of said, "Look, we believe in you. You're the best at what you do. We have opportunities to sell cars, but we've long since got rid of our car department. We don't have one anymore. But we'll go into partnership with you." So that's what happened. Now, it wasn't like a monetary partnership. It was just more of, and Sotheby's had quite a few of these associated businesses where they would work with specialists in certain areas to help grow their business and 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 so throughout 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that was the model. And RM set up in Europe. They had two auctions a year, and then around about 2014, 15, Sotheby's put some money into RM auctions, and acquired about 25% of the business, and we became RM Sotheby's. And then since then, they've acquired some more of us. Now they have a majority ownership within the business. But so for us in Europe and in the UK, having the Sotheby's name is huge. And
Yeah.
usually most people, when I say, I'm Greg Anderson from RM Sotheby's," they'll immediately drop the RM and they'll just say Sotheby's because that's the bit they know and
Yeah.
they remember, which is a bit
Yeah.
unfair, especially to Rob because he's putting all of this time and effort throughout his whole life building this wonderful business. But that's just the nature of of how people think in the UK, Europe, and certainly in the Middle East. In North America, people still very much refer to it as RM Auctions as much as they do RM Sotheby's because they have a
Yeah.
much bigger footprint before the Sotheby's name came into play. But it's you know we're still two separate companies, even though they own a majority of our business. We still operate with pretty much 100% autonomy to do what we want, how we want to do it. Um, and there are some nice occasions where we overlap. So occasionally we'll sell a couple of cars in a contemporary art sale because they might be, you could argue that this car is, or, is a piece of art as much as it is a vehicle. And
Yeah.
so there are some nice crossovers. We sell watches at some of our car auctions, sell handbags at some, and jewelry at some of our car auctions and things like this, and it goes quite well. But mainly it's as a door opener, it's tremendously beneficial to us to have such a huge brand on our business cards. It makes the world of difference, and it's
Yeah.
no real surprise that since that has happened, our business has grown organically, but grown really, really nicely, and continue to sort of dominate the top end of the car market in terms of sales and things like that. And I think a lot of that is down to our association with Sotheby's.
Yeah, I think it's a very smart link, isn't it? As like you say, it doesn't work in every market. We've talked quite a few times, talking of markets, about the Middle East. My gut reaction would be that must be a massively growing area for you guys,
Mm.
as we see with lots of our other clients, where there's a lot of money and a lot of growth and a lot of requirement to, let's say, show that growth off. That wealth off. Is that what you're seeing? Are you seeing a lot out in the Middle East now?
Yeah, it's a fascinating place. I really enjoy working out there, and we did it well. We planned for it for a couple of years before we actually held our first auction there. We wanted to fully understand it and work out whether this was really something that had some potential, or whether it was a bit smoke and mirrors. We just weren't sure. But what we did find is an incredibly welcoming and very relaxed car culture, which was which was like a breath of fresh air because you can find, obviously, a lot of the vehicles we sell are worth an awful lot of money, and you can find that there is a little bit of a sort of it's difficult to sort of break into that market and into that world because a lot of the people that own these things are very private, very wealthy, very private people. Um, in the Middle East, it's different. There's a lot more openness about what you own, what you do, how you use it in terms of the cars and things. And you'll find that the car events, you'll have a huge range of different cars there. So you'll have, a car that costs a few £1,000s, like something very basic, and you'll also have something which will cost a few million. And everybody mixes, nobody cares. You're there for the fun and enjoyment of just using and driving your car. And so that was something which was great for us. And we found that whenever we spoke to people, they wanted us to do business there. They wanted us to come and set up an auction and to try and be successful. We found it to be incredibly uh, you know not easy, but certainly we found it to be a very, it's very much open for business. And
Yeah,
and what we have found is that the very rare sort of items that come along and that we sell incredibly well in that region. You can find there's a lot of car dealers out there. There's a lot of people selling expensive, exotic cars and things. What they don't always have is that very sort of rare, extremely special item. And when we do have something and we send it out there, it does incredibly well. But
yeah,
most importantly, it's just a refreshing environment in which to operate. The people that we've met in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and in Saudi and other areas, full credit to them. They've been incredibly welcoming and really sort of nice sort of group of people to work with. And they're all trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to create a car culture, and it's nice to get into something like that when it's still a little bit embryonic. It's established to a point, but there's an awful lot to do. And what's quite interesting, I don't want to speak out of turn too much, but the Sotheby's ownership has changed in recent years, or in the last 12 months. So I think about 20 or 25% of that is now owned by the Abu Dhabi royal family, in some capacity in one of their investment companies. And um, and so so what we found is that there's a huge appetite now for them to actually try and help Sotheby's and RM Sotheby's grow within the region, and it's a fascinating place to work from that perspective, and it's kind of a little bit political, and but it's also nice to be somewhere where you can actually impact what might be coming a little bit later down the line, and get into a huge project at an early stage. So yeah, I found that working out there, and certainly the business has found it from a financial perspective to be really beneficial.
brilliant. Is it? I mean, it's really interesting hearing you talk about what you'd think was a pretty established market of auctions. It's been around since humans have, really, hasn't
Yeah.
it? But if you think about your journey with the business, you there's been a lot of change, like you say, positively, the move online, the move into new markets and selling and then ownership. So how have you seen in your 15 years that you've been, it is 15 years, isn't it, Greg? Was it
Yeah,
2010
yeah,
you,
yeah.
yeah. How have you seen obviously you've seen your role evolve. How have you felt your leadership has evolved and your skill set?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know. Like, um, I don't think I've ever had. Well, all right. I must have a leadership style, I guess, but I lean a, I lean a lot on other people, Steve. Right? So I don't. I have an idea maybe about what we should do. Maybe say for example, I say, oh, maybe an auction here would be a good idea, but I'm not making that decision by myself. I believe in collaborative sort of thinking and discussion because I'm the managing director of the business, but the head of sales, that's the person who's charged with getting all of the cars to our auctions, right? So I can't possibly go down the road of saying, we're going to do this and not take that person's views into account. Um, and there are other important people within the business too who help with this decision making process. So I'm a very collaborative thinker. I like to bring people in. I like to make it a team decision, and I like to get people's buy-in. Like, I don't like to sort of have to sit there and say this is what we're going to do and that's how it's going to be and blah blah blah. Much prefer to say I've got this idea, or I've been talking to my colleague about this idea. What do we think? Shall we go for it as a business? And
Yeah,
that decision between five or six or even seven or eight people at times um, is how I like to do it, because then I feel that all areas of the business have been considered. Everybody, understands what we need to be doing and why we're doing it. And if there's any concerns, we can talk about it there. Um, and I feel like that's always been the way I've done it. Like even when I was a sort of an event manager, 20 years ago, whatever, um, I found that I was managing people who were much older than me and knew they were experts in what they did, whether it's a lighting technician, a stage builder, a truck driver, whatever. They were experts. And I was like, I can't tell these guys what to do because I don't know what they should, you know what I mean? I don't know the answers.
Yeah, yeah,
So I've got to, but I felt that my role was best placed where I would remove their obstacles. What do you need from me? How can I help? Like that kind
yeah.
of approach. And I found that that's probably the way in which I most manage is I'm fortunate at RM Sotheby's that there is a really very experienced, very skilled management team and senior management team. I spend most of my time doing everything I can to make their jobs easier. You see what I mean? I'm not there saying, got
That's
to do this, you got
fascinating.
to do that. It's more a question of, what we've got to do for the rest of the year. What do you need from me to help you do it to the best of your ability? And whether that's more resource, whether that's sort of helping them to remove some obstacles or roadblocks from what it is they're doing. Like I find that is what gets us to where we're going, because I mean I'm not really an expert in many of the different departments within the company, but I do understand the auction business. I do sort of get that part, and I think I've shown that, but I can't. No, I can't photograph a car. I can't write a description about a car. I can't even source a car and find a buyer for it. Like none of those things are my skill set at all. But I can the people whose are, I'll make their lives as easy as possible.
So it's a real feeling of empowerment. But I suppose it's interesting if you think about the roles that you've already explained that you did previously to joining and in the last 15 years. When you've done those roles, then you understand them. So when you know that the person that's working doing that job, you sort of know what they're going through, and you can have empathy with them and
Yeah.
understand the challenges that are within there. That I think that makes great leadership. Because
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
why have all these people as experts and then not use them and do them the best they can?
Yeah.
It's quite
I
straightforward,
totally.
isn't it, when you think about it?
Yeah. That's my view, and it seems to have worked, right? So, you sort of. I feel like you know what it's sort of on the same point is, there's a lot that gets written about leadership and about being this person, you know this super person almost at times. I never feel like much is ever written about the importance of being just a great colleague and a great employee, and and the value of that for me is huge. And I have this conversation with quite a lot of the younger people in our business, because there is so much ambition there, which is great, and I don't want to ever knock that out of them. But there is an association with, I've got to have a certain job title, or I've got to earn a certain amount of money, or I've got to
Yeah,
try and progress my career in this way, and that's all really really good. But don't forget that, in my opinion, that being a brilliant colleague, being so dependable, being so good at your job, and just doing the simple things right every time, and being humble, being working hard, being respectful to your colleagues. Come, when you're going to be there, be there. You know, like all of these things, they are vital to any business being successful. And you can make lots of stories about wonderful leaders who change the world within their businesses, and that's great. And sometimes that is definitely the case. But I feel like the importance of being a good colleague, a great colleague, is quite often overlooked.
yeah. No, you're right. It's people, both internally and externally. People do business with people, don't they?
Yeah,
And if you're a good
absolutely.
person who people want to spend time with, guess what? You'll learn from them. You'll both evolve and develop by that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's some great advice. Quick question for you then.
Oh, yeah.
What is the favourite car that you've been involved with selling whilst you've been there in 15 years? Can you name one? Obviously, there was a one that was millions and
Yeah.
millions and millions, but we won't do that. Is there one that you really think that was the one that I love doing?
I've got quite I've got a bad taste in cars, Steve. I'm not someone here who can sit here and like. I mean, I love a Land Rover Defender or a G-Wagon or something like that. They're my
Yeah,
favorite cars in the world. I love all of that stuff. Um, but to be honest, it really does depend. I mean, it, sometimes you'll go somewhere and you'll see something you think, wow, that's insane. Like a Dino or a Testarossa of some variety or whatever it might be. Um, I think that's the kind of nice thing about the industry, though, is that you'll have people who have such different views as to what they think is, a work of art or is their number one car, and they'll
yeah,
have quite often very personal reasons for it too. And the usual reason, or a lot of the reasons, is that was the car I adored when I was growing up, right? And then
yeah,
once that person gets to a certain point in their life and they can afford it, they go and buy it because it has that meaning to
yeah.
them. And that
It's
that
that
is huge.
closure moment, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
There
huge,
was
and that's
something you put on the website about a Duemilio route sale in Milan. Is that
yeah. That was a sale we did in Italy, I think in 2016, um, which was essentially a government repossession. So somebody owed
in
the
good
government
Italian style?
somebody owed the government a lot of money, and they confiscated all of their possessions, and it included a car collection of, I think it was like 500 cars that he had,
Well,
which is an insane number. There are very few people that have 500 cars, so don't think that's like a regular thing. Um,
yeah.
but it was all without reserve, so it was selling for whatever. And so no reserve means there isn't a reserve price, which means if somebody
It
pays,
could go for 1,000 quid. If yeah, yeah.
could, yeah, it could go for a grand, it could go for 10 million. Like there's no limit. Um, so because of that, we attracted a huge audience, and I've never seen anything like it. We had an exhibition hall in Milan. There was, I don't know, there was all of these cars in there, and there was another 500 pieces of memorabilia. I think it was 1,000 lots in total, including some boats and all kinds of different
As
items.
you do.
Yeah, and we sold a lot, but it took 3 days for us to sell everything, and the audience was massive. And usually an auctioneer has to tease bids out of the audience, and there's a nice style to the way that an auctioneer will work, where they'll ask for a certain price, and the audience will think about it, and they'll get a bid, and then
Yeah, it's
it's kind
like
of
a
a nice
dance
pace.
nearly between the two.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
right. Yeah. But with this sale, it was, so I'm going to open a lot of £1,000, and there'd be, I don't know, 100 hands in the air. And the auctioneer was just counting the money up until one person had a hand still left in the air. And it was like, yep, sold, yours, on to the next. It was, it was an insane moment and something that I'd never experienced. I think we estimated the whole lot at around about 25 million euros, and it sold for in excess of 50, which was a huge return, and obviously helped out this person who'd had all, who owned the government quite a lot of
Deal
money.
with his
But
government friends. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I wonder if he might have even turned a profit in the end. So you never know.
Yeah,
But
that's
it
it.
was a
Yeah, yeah.
but it was a brilliant moment, and it perfectly encapsulated what working at an auction's all about, and working for an auction house is all about. It was, super successful, really exciting, massive amounts of hard work, because it was like 10 auctions in one in terms of
And the
the operational
size of
lift.
that is scary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a great story. Thank you. Thank you
yeah,
for
yeah.
sharing that.
That's right.
So, look, unfortunately, we've run out of time. One last
Yeah.
question that I always like to ask the guests. Um, if you can reflect now and think about, what you learned pre being at RM Sotheby's, and then especially your journey over the last 15 years, is there a piece of advice you'd love to give to young Gregory starting out in his new job in 2010, that you thought, oh, that could have saved a bit of pain, or might have got his moved up a bit higher, a bit quicker? Is there one thing that stands out?
Yeah, but it's not just related to then. It's actually it's something which I stumbled on for quite a while, and that is, not trying to do everything myself, right? So going to the right person to ask for advice when I needed it. And I think that I've gotten way more comfortable asking for advice these days. In fact, I find it doesn't. I don't even think about it. But back when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I felt like I always had to try and do things, all by myself, and that was a definite. I felt like if I asked a question, that was a weakness or that was a problem, and it's
Yeah,
not. It's
yeah,
absolutely not. And in fact, I'd advise everybody, especially when you're younger and you're starting out in your career, if you've been given something to do and you're just not sure, you know, go and ask because people are generally
Yeah,
really helpful and they want to help you and they want to see you fail. There's no harm and shame in any of that. And I think that's also sort of a bit of a thing when I first started out in terms of my career too, is that I had a I had a view as to what I wanted to do. Like I wanted to get into the politics world. Okay. And I read about it and I went online and read about it. I didn't pick up the phone to anybody and talk to them though, and I should have done. Like this week I've had a couple of people who've asked me to speak to them on the phone for half an hour to tell them about what the car auction world is all about. No problem. I'll do that whenever anybody wants. It's perfect. And if I can't, I'll find someone who can, and they will too, because that's what
yeah,
most people are happy to do. And I think like when you're younger, that can be sort of a bit of a daunting thing. But get over it is my advice, and just go and do it. Like pick up the phone to someone or arrange a
yeah.
Teams call, whatever it might be. I think it's really valuable.
I think that's fantastic advice. And like you say, it nearly becomes easier with years of experience because you know the right questions to ask. But it's not a weakness. It's actually showing that you care and you're trying to learn, isn't it?
Yeah,
And do it right.
yeah, I totally agree.
Greg, thank you so much for giving us an insight into a world that probably, well, I certainly didn't know much about, or I thought I did, but that is absolutely fascinating. So thank you for
All right.
sharing that, and good luck as your world evolves and the market grows into the future.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. It's a pleasure.